Sí. Hola, buenas tardes. Hoy tenemos el privilegio de que esté aquí en Donosti una mujer, una persona excepcional. Es escritora, economista, analista política y periodista. Es Loretta Napoleoni. Loretta Napoleoni va a impartir una conferencia en inglés, con traducción simultánea, se titula «Para la fortaleza europea, la crisis migratoria es un problema político no humanitario». Loretta Napoleoni nació en Roma, actualmente vive entre Estados Unidos y Gran Bretaña, y a mediados de la época de los años 70 se convirtió en miembro activo del movimiento feminista y en el activismo político. Ha sido becaria Fulbright en la Escuela Paul Nitze de Estudios Internacionales Avanzados de la Universidad Johns Hopkins en Washington y becaria rotaria en la Escuela de Economía de Londres. Tiene asimismo una maestría, un máster en Filosofía en Relaciones Internacionales y uno en Terrorismo en la London School of Economics. Comenzó su carrera como economista trabajando para varios bancos y organizaciones internacionales en Europa y en Estados Unidos. En los años 80 estuvo en Hungría, trabajó en el Banco Nacional de Hungría y en la década de los 80 trabajó para un banco ruso registrado en Reino Unido, el Moscow Narodny Bank. Con ello acumuló una experiencia extraordinaria en la que le proporcionó una visión única de la economía soviética y de lo que en aquel entonces era la economía soviética. Es la autora más vendida, una de las autoras más vendidas, es experta en financiación del terrorismo y blanqueo de capitales, y asesora a varios gobiernos y organismos internacionales en la lucha contra el terrorismo y el blanqueo de capitales. Es también comentarista de medios habituales como la CNN, Sky y la BBC y escribe sobre terrorismo, lavado de dinero y economía para varios periódicos financieros, así como para El País, The Guardian y Le Monde. Su trabajo, por tanto, se conjuga entre el periodismo, la economía, el terrorismo y el asesoramiento también a gobiernos. Ella trabaja también como asesora en la materia de terrorismo y blanqueo de capitales. Tiene una base fuertemente crítica también. Como periodista, en la época de los 90, entrevistó a las Brigadas Rojas, el grupo armado marxista italiano, y posteriormente estuvo 3 años entrevistando a miembros de otras organizaciones terroristas. En 2003 entrevistó a seguidores de al-Zarqawi, tanto en Europa como en Oriente Medio. Los libros de Loretta Napoleoni incluyen Modern Jihad, Terror INC, Irak Insurgente, Terror Incorporated, Terror and the Economy, y también últimamente, en los últimos años o ya desde 1911, has tenido interés en la economía china y actualmente en la economía coreana también, ¿no? Y su último libro es El poder de tejer. Y bien, su tesis, digamos, es que con respecto al ISIS, es que no quiere destruir, sino construir la versión del siglo XXI del califato, y eso es lo que los hace tan peligrosos. Y en su libro lanzado en 2016, Merchants of Men, traficantes de personas o de hombres, examina el vínculo entre la política exterior occidental posterior al 11 de septiembre, así como con el secuestro y la crisis de refugiados. Para ella, la política exterior occidental, a partir del 11 de septiembre, es responsable del nacimiento de una nueva generación de criminales y terroristas involucrados en el secuestro de personas occidentales y el tráfico de inmigrantes. Y bien, ya sin más, dejo con Loretta Napoleoni.
Bueno, gracias. Es un currículum muy largo porque yo soy muy vieja. Esta es la verdad. Okay. So, last March, I watched a documentary on the BBC, and it was quite interesting because in the documentary they were interviewing the father of a surrogate child from the Ukraine, and he was complaining that it took so long for the mother of the surrogate child and her family to reach the United Kingdom. So he had to go to France, where they had escaped after the invasion of Russia, in order to help them to process all the documentation to be accepted as refugees in the UK. The time that it took was 2 weeks, and he thought it was too much. So, according to the UK legislation at that time, any families or anybody that had a sponsor in the UK was allowed to come into the UK, and then the government was going to pay for everything. So the family that took this surrogate mother with their family were given money by the UK government. The children were immediately enrolled in schools, and also the parents were giving a crash course in English in order to be able to find a job. So I would say that this was a 5-star treatment of a refugee. Now, of course, while I was watching, I was very pleased that the UK had put in place such a good legislation for people who had lost everything almost overnight, because, I mean, these people basically had to run. They lived in the east part of the Ukraine. But at the same time, because of my experience and all the work I've done with migrants and refugees, I could not stop thinking about the thousands and thousands of people that are still marching towards Fortress Europe, people that come from Central Asia, people that come from East and West Africa, from the Middle East. I also couldn't stop thinking about the people who are stuck in the camps across the channel, who every day try to cross that water, and sometimes, you know, they succeed, and when they succeed and they reach the United Kingdom, a new legislation which was put in place by the previous government of Boris Johnson was going to deport them to Uganda. This was an agreement that they reached at the same time in which they decided to help the Ukrainians so much. They also decided to expel the migrants that they didn't want to an African country, which I thought was absolutely shocking. So what I realized while I was watching this documentary is that the system is completely crooked. So there is a legalized discrimination among the people that want to reach Europe because, they're persecuted in their own countries. So there is a first-class group of refugees, and these, of course, are the Ukrainians at the moment. They have a fast-track system to be integrated into our societies. And the reason why they do is because they have a political purpose for us. It has nothing to do with what they're escaping from. Then there is a second class of migrants, and these are those that manage to reach their destination, and they stay wherever they are because they can be exploited by us. And then there is the third class of migrants, and these are the so-called invisible people. So these are the people that we don't want. These are the people that we are happy to keep in detentions facilities in Libya, or those ones that we're sending back to Uganda. These are the unwanted migrants. So this week we had a sort of sneak preview of what's going to happen in Italy with the new government. We had two boats that were approaching Italy, and the government said that they didn't want them to download their merchandise, meaning the migrants. In the end, the so-called fragile people were allowed to come on land. Some people that were considered not fragile and not sick were prohibited from reaching their destination, Italy. In the end, Brussels put some pressure, and then everybody was fragile, and then they actually let them in. But this is just the beginning. I mean, nothing has changed. The European policy is still the same. People will continue to be divided in different groups according to what we want from them. Their stories, their past, the reason why they have become migrants, it is irrelevant to us because we consider them as objects, as merchandise, and as such we dispose of them as we please. So this is an inhuman way of dealing with people, which goes well beyond racism between white people or black people, between the North and the South. This inhumanity is functional to our capitalism. It is something that we want to do, that we're happy to do and will continue to do in order to maintain the supremacy of our own system, so the supremacy of the West. So economics is dictating our humanity. I mean, the word humanity has nothing to do with moral or ethic principles. It's actually an economic category. So to understand how we got to this aberration, which of course has happened before in history, I'm not saying that this is unique, but it is something that has happened in a society that we consider an advanced society, a civil society, a society that has principle, a democratic society. So this is why I say it's an aberration. So we have to go back to 9/11, to what happened right after 9/11. So the first response to 9/11, if you remember, in October 2001, was the introduction of the Patriot Act. So the Patriot Act had a financial and economic section, which is what interests us, and basically gave the US Monetary Authority the right to monitor any transaction in US dollars anywhere in the world. He also gave the US Monetary Authority the right to impose restriction to banks. So the maximum amount of cash that you can bring into a US bank was put at $10,000. Now, so you can imagine the impact of a legislation like this on the money laundering of the Colombian drug cartel. So until 9/11, all the cocaine that was produced in Colombia went all the way to the States. The money were money laundered in the US, and then from there, the cocaine was shipped everywhere, including Europe, which was, the most important market. Now, with the introduction of the Patriot Act, this was not possible anymore, because, of course, the monetary authority were monitoring any transaction. So the cartel decided that he had to find a different way to money launder this money. And this different way was offered by the Italian organized crime from Calabria, which is called the 'Ndrangheta. So the 'Ndrangheta basically said, sorry, this is the end. So the 'Ndrangheta said, well, look, we'll do the job for you. So we'll money launder in euro. Now, you remember the euro was introduced at that time. It was a very solid, let's say, currency, which was present in more than one country. So he offered great potentials. So the 'Ndrangheta said, but we'll change the route. We're not going anymore to the US from Colombia. We're going to Venezuela from Colombia, and then from Venezuela, we'll fly small planes to Guinea-Bissau. They basically bought Guinea-Bissau. So the planes would arrive to Guinea-Bissau, and then from Guinea-Bissau, the cocaine would travel across the route, the Sahara route, all the way to Libya, and then from Libya, it would cross into Italy, and then from Italy to the rest of Europe. So we're talking about 2002. So the people that smuggle this cocaine were actually mostly former mujahideen from Algeria. These people have been pushed to the south of the Sahara by the military coup that took place at the end of the 90s, and therefore they survived by smuggling whatever they could. Mostly was, cigarettes or other products from Algeria to Chad and West Africa. Then all of a sudden, of course, we have the cocaine coming. So this was a very, very good business for this kind of people. So it was a sort of blessing for them, because it put cash in their hands, also accelerated at the same time the political destabilization of the entire West African region. Why? Because basically these smugglers mujahideen started to recruit young people, and the money was so good that people basically flocked to be part of this business. So by the beginning of 2003, so a year later, the cocaine business had become the primary source of subsistence in that part of Africa. And it was at that point that one of these groups of former mujahideen, which was headed by somebody called Bel Mokhtar, it was from Algeria, decided to invest in a new business, and this business was the kidnapping. So they started to kidnap people, mostly, of course, Western people, they were in the region. The first kidnapping was 32 Europeans. They were taken in southern Algeria and Mauritania, and the ransom was 6 million euros. That was a lot of money for these people. So with this money, they created Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. So the story that Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb was actually a branch of Al-Qaeda is actually not true. I mean, these were criminals, basically, that decided to cover up their activity pretending to be jihadists, but de facto, these were criminals. So it was an organization, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, that was self-funded, and to a certain extent, it is the first example of criminal jihadism that we find. Then we'll see that this was then exported in different parts of the world, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, and of course, East Africa. So the business was very good because people kept going on holiday, trekking in Mauritania. Also, there were journalists, there were aid workers. So as long as this lasted, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb made hundreds of millions of dollars. So it was a very, very rich organization. But then things changed, of course, because by 2010, 2012, Westerners decided not to go on holiday in these areas. Journalists were not allowed to travel there. So the kidnapping business basically died out. It is at that point that Al-Qaeda and the Maghrebs realized that there is another business which is even better than the kidnapping, and this business is smuggling of people. Now, the migration from West Africa more or less started around 2005, 2006, and it is very much also linked to the destabilization of the region due to the cocaine new route that the Ndrangheta had introduced. So people were migrating, people were going north, people were going to Europe because they couldn't live where they were. So there were two choices. One was to become a jihadist stroke criminal, so join Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, or try their chances to reach Europe. So it was a very good business. Also, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb had the structure, the infrastructure in place to become a big smuggler of people because, they were smuggling cocaine anyway. So, they knew all the route, they had all the transportation that they needed. But also, they were in the business of kidnapping. So they had different camps where they could keep the people. So they had absolutely everything that they needed. So this is how the business started. And of course, the destination of the human cargoes was the same of the destination of the cocaine, which is Libya. So here are the story of the migrants, how the migrant crisis that we faced around 2013, 2014, and 15 actually started. So what happened to these people in Libya? So the people in Libya were traffickers, were smuggled, they were kidnapped, they were imprisoned by local gangs. All of this was part of an agreement that Silvio Berlusconi had achieved with Gaddafi in 2010. The agreement was that Italy would pay the government of Gaddafi money in order to keep the migrants in Libya, so to prevent them from crossing the Mediterranean. So a business of trafficking people started more or less during that time. Italy also gave money for equipment, money to build concentration camps, because this is what we're talking about, where these people could be kept. When the regime of Gaddafi fell, nothing changed, because the various groups that took over different parts of the country carried on doing exactly the same thing. Now, a few years later, the European Union achieved a similar agreement with Turkey for the Syrian refugees. So Turkey was paid money in order to set up refugee camps, which again are concentration camps, to prevent Syrians from reaching Europe. Now, these agreements are still in place, so nothing has changed. So if we go to East Africa, we see something very similar happening. So you remember there used to be the pirates in Somalia. That was a very good business, the hijacking of cargoes. But again, that business ended around 2014 because the ships started to travel with armed guards. They were much more careful about crossing the Red Sea. So again, the Somali pirates face a big problem because their most important sustenance, source of sustenance was dying. So they also realized that there was a very big migration taking place from East Africa. So the same kind of destabilization that we have seen happening in West Africa about a decade later took place in West Africa. Again, we have the jihadism, we have Islamic governments, but also we have climate change. Let's not forget this other element. So people wanted to migrate, not necessarily to Europe, but actually to the Arabian Peninsula, where they could find work. So the pirates became smugglers. So they took the people across the sea to Yemen, and then from Yemen, they would take them, to wherever, was their destination in the Arabic Peninsula. So we see West Africa and East Africa, the same kind of pattern is happening. And the same people, so we have people that started a certain kind of business, which is kidnapping individuals or hijacking cargoes, branching into another business, because actually smuggling people is a much bigger business and is also a long-term business. It's not going to die away. On the contrary, people will keep coming because the destabilization of the area, instead of finding a solution, is actually becoming more and more serious. So we see this link between kidnapping and human smuggling also in Syria. So what happened in Syria, you remember from 2011, when the civil war started, to the end of 2014, kidnapping of individual Syrians and Western is the most important source of revenues for jihadists and for the Assad regime. So the Assad regime generally kidnap wealthy Syrians and ask for ransom in order to free them. And the jihadists kidnap Westerners, mostly journalists, and ask for huge ransom in order to free them. But then again, as the migration from Syria, the wealthy Syrian started to leave the country, and as Western journalists are prevented from going to Syria, that business also dies. So what the jihadist criminal groups started to do, they started to do exactly the same thing that was seen in West and East Africa, they started to smuggle people. Now, the business literally boomed when Angela Merkel opened Germany. You remember the story that, so here we are. So these are the routes that the smugglers would take. People were coming from everywhere in order to reach Europe through those gates. So we have, the Middle Eastern gate, where, we have the Syrian jihadist criminal organization. We have the East African gates, and then we have the West African gates. And where do they go? They go mostly to Libya. So these are the entry points. So at a certain point, we have people coming from Bangladesh, people coming from Afghanistan, because, let's not forget that this is just a fraction of the amount of people who are migrating at the moment. So everybody was coming, especially after Germany opened the borders. Now, this was a problem from Europe, of course. The borders could be open for a while, for a short time. It was a political move, of course, that made Angela Merkel very popular, all of a sudden, also very human. But, that gate had to be closed as quickly as possible. So what was the policy followed by Europe? So it was a twofold policy. Number one, the Middle Eastern route had to be blocked because, we could not have people coming from Central Africa via that route. And the route was closed by giving Russia, Iran, and to a certain extent also Turkey, basically carte blanche in Syria in order to crush the Islamic State and any kind of jihadist or criminal group that was in the business of smuggling. And then the other policy was to block the migrants at the gate of Europe the same way, of course, the Berlusconi tried to do in 2010. So the tension comes. So I know it seems incredible, but what is happening in the Ukraine today is what has happened in Syria a few years ago, and before that in Chechnya, and then, in Georgia. Putin has been doing the same thing over and over again, so only now we don't like it. But in Syria, we did like it. In reality, because of that policy that was implemented, the Assad regime managed to consolidate its position. The opposition was crushed, any kind, of course, of opposition, and the refugees have been locked in camps in Turkey, which, of course, they are paid by us, by the European Union. The Syrian route to Europe is closed. I wouldn't say it's 100% closed, but, it's very, very small number of people manage to come across. Mostly, actually, they go through the Balkans now. But anyway, so that policy was a success. The other one, the blocking of refugees in Libya also has been a success. I'll just give you a few numbers. So we have over 1,000 miles of wall has been built by the Europeans, of course. High-tech fencing also is being constructed. So this is all, at the gates, basically, of Europe. Drones monitor the area. The European Border and Coast Guard Agency, which is Frontex, has expanded. So its budget in 2018 was 118 million euros per year. In 2022, it's going to be 754 million per year. You think about, how many things we could do with those money instead of, giving it to companies that basically do surveillance or to the Libyans. Anyway, so at the moment in Libya there are 27 official detention centers. These are the officials. We don't know how many unofficial places. The EU continues to collaborate with the Libyan Coastal Guard in order to force people to go back. So basically, this is how it works. I mean, I interviewed a lot of these people when I wrote a book about merchants of men. In reality, the Coastal Guard of Libya is the first barrier. So the very few that succeed to reach the coast and get on a boat basically are generally blocked by the Coastal Guard. So the Coastal Guard will block you, send you back, and then you start all over again the story. So you get smuggled, you get kidnapped, you get trafficked, and so on. The one that you see that reach Italy, like these 2 boats of this week, are the very, very lucky who are not stopped by the Libyan Coastal Guard. So imagine how many people try to cross if only this very little amount reaches us, and it seems so much. So this policy, the European policy towards the migrants, is very similar to the US policy towards the migrants, and the Biden administration has not changed at all. So the Biden administration has continued to do exactly the same thing that the Trump administration has done. So in less than 2 years, we have over 1 million expulsions of Latin American and Caribbean people, and these people are denying any rights to ask for political asylum. So, they get stopped, sent back, no matter why or what's happened, that's it. Okay, so what is the, why are we pursuing this kind of policy? Well, the reason why we're pursuing this policy is because, we do need migrants. We have problems. We have population rate of growth which is, too low in order to maintain our living standard, and this is true in the US as it is true in Europe. So we need migrants, but we need a certain type of migrants. So we need people that can be beneficial to our economy right away. We do not want people that we have to educate, that we have to bring to a certain level. So this explains why the first wave of Syrians were welcome, because the Syrians were highly educated people. They all spoke a foreign language. It was easy to integrate these people and get them to become productive. The Ukrainians are welcome for a different reason, for political reason. Now we took a stand against Putin, so they have a political value to us, not an economic value, but nevertheless, it is still important because now we are perceived as the countries that defend democracy. So it is overall something that we want. Also, the Ukraine is important for us because in reality it's a proxy war in the Ukraine. So as long as we keep the refugees and welcome them, it doesn't look so bad that we are turning their country is a proxy war for our own interests. Different situation is for the Afghans, or that nobody wants them, especially. Different situation is also for the women of Iran. We're not interested in what they're doing. We're not supporting them because politically this is not what we want. The Americans abandoned Afghanistan after 20 years because the war was not any longer important politically or economically. So that's basically the story that we face today. Do we know all of this? Well, I think we do, but we are avoiding confronting ourselves with this kind of reality. We don't want to look at the mirror because, you know, what we will see in the mirror is not something very nice. But nevertheless, we are responsible. What is happening? I mean, there is no time in this conference, of course, here to discuss, you know, the causes. I mean, why all of this is happening? Of course, it's our fault. I mean, you take a country like Somalia, for example, and you realize that Somalia, during the Cold War, was courted by the West and the East, by the Soviets and the Americans, who bankrolled that regime. And the day in which, you know, the Berlin Wall came down, we all left, and the country, of course, plunged into a civil war. And never recovered, basically. There are other problems. There is, you know, climate change. A lot of people that come from Africa, Central Africa, you know, they're coming because there is no way they can survive where they are. And this is because our life in the West requires certain kind of energy consumption. I mean, you know, we are polluting the planet more than anybody else. Well, of course, there is also China. But what I'm saying is it is our responsibility to solve this problem, but we decide not to. Now, this is all very good, of course, for the business of human smuggling, because, I mean, this is an example of how much does it cost to reach Europe. Now we're talking about 10,000 euros, which is not a lot, but if you think about, but, you know, if you add it all up, you know, that this is the last stretch. I mean, this is a phenomenal amount of money for people. They have nothing. And I will conclude this talk with something that is even more disturbing than what I said before. In reality, we almost, I wouldn't say but this kind of business of human smuggling and the cost, the phenomenal cost, is almost functional to the type of migrants we want. Because the one that can afford to pay so much most likely is better educated than the one that cannot afford it. The one that can afford to pay that kind of money is also more determined than the others. So in the end, he may turn out to be a better member of our society in order to produce for our society. So it's a sort of interdependency between our economic needs and, you know, this murky world of human smuggling and trafficking. And again, it is a very, very disturbing aspect of the needs of a society like ours, where everything is easy, where, you know, we have refrigerators, we have you know, heating, and we have opportunities. While, you know, just outside the gates of this fortress, there are people that have nothing, and they put their life at risk just, you know, to be able to survive. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And muchas gracias por esta lectura tan esclarecedora y, por otro lado, por esta este mapa de una visión casi de una realidad aterradora también, porque has citado constantemente la palabra business, ¿no? Y negocio, que lleva a una comprensión de que la economía del siglo XXI a nivel global se funda, entre otras cosas, como pueden ser drogas, que también están conectadas con el terrorismo, ¿no? Pero está fundada en las armas, el tráfico de personas, los desplazamientos de personas, las guerras, y todo está perfectamente interconectado y por eso nada cambia, ¿no? Porque en realidad es una economía, como lo pudo ser el tráfico de esclavos
es una economía.
Africanos, es una economía.
No sé si hay preguntas.
Muchas gracias. Es una pregunta.
Espera, que te diga.
Bueno, primero, muchas gracias. Una pregunta respecto a la necesidad, al hecho de que podamos estar interesados, siempre estamos interesados, el inmigrante de lujo, preparado, etcétera. Pero sí que es una pregunta. En los últimos años, sobre todo después del COVID, hemos visto que hay un cambio, hay una necesidad, al contrario, de personas que realizan trabajos que ya nosotros no realizamos, trabajos que no requieren gente formada. Entonces la pregunta es, ¿está cambiando esa necesidad no solo de tener el inmigrante preparado, sino a este punto puede ser interés del capital tener el inmigrante no formado para hacer lo que nosotros ya no hacemos? Además porque hay problemas de natalidad, de envejecimiento de la población. No sé, eso es un poco saber si está cambiando, puede cambiar el nivel político por esa necesidad.
Now, this is very interesting what you said, because so basically what has happened since COVID is that less and less people have gone back in certain jobs. So we're talking about the unskilled labor. There is a shortage of people everywhere. So there is a shortage in the UK, there is a shortage in Spain, there's a shortage in Italy. I mean, everywhere. In the US, same story. So the reason number one is that we slow down the economy, and the system did not anticipate that the economy would restart so quickly. And partly it's because of technology. So because of technology, people were able to carry on working. So the economy in reality didn't slow down so much, but the system, of course, thought that the economy was slowing down because everybody was at home. Nobody was going out. So there is a time lag which they didn't predict. And the other thing, and the other element is that some people decided that they didn't want to work so much. Some people also decided that they didn't want to emigrate and go where there is work. So they would settle for a less payment or a job that was not their dream, but not to have to move somewhere else. So there is less labor mobility inside the system. So these are the two elements that produce this shortage. Now, can we fill up the gap with the migrants? Yes, but not so quickly. So there is a time gap, and this time gap can be 3-4 years. So yes, we could get unskilled labor now, but then there is the barrier of the language. So you got to teach these people the language even to do the unskilled work, and that takes time. So this is why the UK put this program in place of crash course in English, because the UK took everybody from Ukraine. So even the unskilled labor came in as long as they were from the Ukraine. But how are you going to get them to work if they don't speak? So countries like Italy or Spain don't have this kind of system in place. So a lot of the unskilled labor that comes from the migrants ends up in the sort of black economy, so it doesn't actually get in. But it's an interesting point that if I were a politician a year ago when we reopened everything and seeing what is happening with the economy, for sure I would have encouraged the migrants to be absorbed into the system, and I would facilitate it for the migrants. But, you know, I'm not a politician because I'm intelligent, I guess.
Tal y como ha explicado la situación, parece que todo forma parte de grandes operaciones, de grandes negocios a los que el ciudadano no sé cómo puede ayudar a cambiar la situación. ¿Qué podemos hacer los ciudadanos para intentar revertir esta situación?
See, this is also a very important question. I think the policy towards the migrants in reality is not part of the political agenda so much, meaning the right-wing parties have it in their agenda, like, you know, the Italian the new Prime Minister Meloni, she campaigned specifically on these issues because, you know, Italy, of course, is perceived as the country where everybody goes. I mean, you know, I do understand that because, as you have seen from the graphs, from Libya to Italy is very, very close. So, but it's not true that the migrants actually stay in Italy. Most of them, you know, travel through Italy because, you know, they want to go to the north because, I mean, the north, the economy of the north is better equipped to absorb them. But nevertheless, you know, the right does campaign on that. The left ignores the problem and then does exactly the same thing. So I think as a citizen, in terms of voting for one party or another party, you can do very, very little. Because I think what we need is more a civil society movement. So the civil society should rebel against this treatment of human beings. So a grassroots movement, and then once the grassroots movement has grown enough, then the politician will have to pay attention to it. But it's very difficult because there are so many issues. I mean, this is one of the many issues that we face. You may say climate change is another huge, huge issue. So it's not one problem, we have many problems. I mean, in the US, there have been initiatives. For example, there was one initiative which, do you remember when Trump divided the children from the families and those poor kids, you know? So they were given these blankets which are made of synthetic, like, you know, the blankets that they give to people that do marathons. So the women that did the Pussy Hat movement, remember the Pussy Hat movement, the protest against Trump when he was elected, where all the women were wearing hand-knitted pink hats. So those women got together and decided to knit enough blankets to cover the entire wall between Mexico and the US. And these blankets were manufactured in this way. They were each person would do a blanket, and in the blanket there was a little welcome card for the kids, because then they were sent to these children. And in the welcome card there was written the story of their family, because in America everybody is an immigrant. And the story of how their parents reached America, and when was that, and where they were coming from, and they were given to the kids. So that was a very, I thought, it was a very strong message that was sent. But of course nothing happened, because you see the Biden administration is carry on with exactly the same policy. Because again, the US is like here. We only want certain kind of people, and we cherry pick them.
Antes del COVID, before COVID, el islamismo, antes de la pandemia de COVID, el fundamentalismo islámico, el ISIS, aterrorizó Europa. ¿Qué es lo que ha pasado? Que ahora no se escucha, no se oye hablar los más media, periódicos, nadie habla del ISIS. Parece que están en África, pero realmente la policía se ha logrado desarticular este movimiento, o es que han cambiado los intereses, se desplazan hacia otras cuestiones. ¿Qué es lo que está pasando con este tipo de terrorismo?
Well, the Islamic State was defeated by the Russian. So what happened in Syria is incredible. I mean, they completely flattened entire cities. They killed everybody. So, which is, same thing happened in Chechnya. And again, the Chechen story, I mean, this is what it bothers me, of the hypocrisy of the West, because, okay, we have no memory, but, we also don't want to have any memory. So the insurgency in Chechnya, and now we're talking about, 2003, right? The insurgency in Chechnya was organized by somebody called Khattab, and he was a jihadist who had been trained by Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. So he crossed over to Chechnya and organized the resistance. And if you remember, at that time, we were all looking at that as something absolutely awful. So nobody said anything at the way that the Russian actually crushed that resistance. I mean, we're talking about serious violation of human rights at national level. So the same pattern we see in Syria, and again, because you have two forces. One is the Islamic State, and the other one is the Russian, and you take side with the Russians. Yeah, I mean, but they're both committing absolutely abysmal crimes. I mean, they're both breaking every single rule of human rights. But that's okay, because I mean, at that time, Putin was doing our dirty work. So it's jihadist movement dead? No, it's not. As it was not dead in 2005 either. But it has been pushed away from our, from Fortress Europe or, from the US. It's going to be very difficult for the same thing to happen again because we have crushed them using methods which should not be allowed because we're not like them, but but we have done the same thing. So it is present in Africa, it's definitely present look at Afghanistan. We made a deal with the Taliban, and who is the enemy of the Taliban in Afghanistan? The Islamic State. So we actually gave back Afghanistan to the Taliban so they can deal with the Islamic State themselves. So it's, I find it disturbing, not only morally, but also I find it stupid because this is a sort of behavior, a sort of practice that will perpetrate this cycle of violence and terror because they will come back. We have not solved the problem. We did not integrate them. We did not understand why they were doing that. On the contrary, we have done exactly the same thing that they have done. So we have legitimized the way they behave.
Arratsaldeon, nik ez dakit nola egingo dugun, nik euskeraz egingo dut, orduan pentsatzen dut sistema konponduta dagoela, zuk ulertzeko galdera badakit ez dezula ulertuko, baina Arratsaldeon, eskerrik asko hitzaldiagatik, nik bi galdera egin nahi nizkizuke. Bat gaurko hitzaldiarekin zer ikusia duena, eta beste bat aprobetxatuz hemen zaudela zure lan baten gainean. Lehenengo galdera da, arazoa oso ederki erakutsi duzu, ikaragarria da, ikaragarri inhumanoa da, etorkinek jasaten duten tratua ona iristeko, baina nik ez dakit soluziorik badaukan kontuak. Esan duzu, zuetzarela politikoa, eta orduan, ez duzula olako soluziorik aipatzen, baina politikoa bazina edo politikoa izan behar da, badauka soluziorik kontu honek, nik oso zaila ikusten dut. Leheno aipatu duzu fronterak irekitzearena, litzateke soluzio optimo bat, baina ez da hala gertatzen desorekatu gabe, desekilibratu gabe Europa edo Estatu Batuak. Ordan, iazuk soluziorik badaukazu, edo zer ikuste duzu. Bigarrena, beste kontu bat da, orain dela, ez dakit, 12 urte, idatzi zenuen, o argitaratu zenuen, Maonomics liburua, eta konparatzen zenuen Txinako ekonomia kapitalista berria, nolabait eraginkorra, efizientea zena, eta mendebaldeko, westeko ekonomiaren arazoak Europan edo Estatu Batuetan, galdetu nahi nizun, ea 10 urte beranduago edo 15 urte beranduago ikusiaz Txinan zer gertatu dan eta mendebaldean zer gertatu dan, ea iritzia aldatu duzun edo indartu duzun edo, baina, bi gauza desberdin dira, eskerrik asko.
Okay, so the first question is really difficult. Well, I think number one, we cannot solve the problem one country alone. Clearly, we need to have Western countries, I mean rich countries, in agreement in order to pursue a policy. Because, I mean, we do have migration everywhere in the world, but most of the migration comes to Europe and to the US. I mean, we also have migration to Australia. Australian policy is as bad as ours. You know, they just keep them on the boats, they don't even let them in. So we need a policy, like an international conference and a body that, like, you know, the one we have for climate, that deals with the issue of migrants. Now, this is a long-term problem because the desertification of parts of the world, I mean, look at in Central Africa, is moving north. So soon we will have the people from Sicily moving up. You know? So it's not a problem that will go away by, you know, blocking people. It's a problem that needs to be addressed properly. I think that there are strategies, but require a commitment, and the commitment would be to change our way of life. I mean, look, now we are willing to sacrifice ourselves for the Ukrainians. Well, it's not cold yet, but you know, we won't be able to use the energy the way we did before. Why can't we do that for people from Africa? So if we are committed, I think, you know, we can reduce the impact of climate change. It's a huge, huge task. The other thing is we can invest. I mean, I'm pretty sure that it's possible to invest money in these regions, and through the investment, help them to develop a sort of middle class, which eventually will free them from dictatorial regimes or, you know, from warlords. I mean, we got to start somewhere, but we don't even think about that. I mean, there is not an aid program, for example, to solve the situation in Libya. On the contrary, we give money to the people that control the various regions of Libya in order to block the migrants. So, you know, it's like feeding an addict with heroin. I think it is possible. It sounds utopian, but maybe that's what we need. We need utopian ideas. We need heroes. We have no heroes, for God's sake, you know. I mean, there's not a figure in the world that inspires us. But in the past, in history, you always had people that put forward ideas which sounded completely utopian, and then in the end, they brought about major changes. So I think this is what could happen, but the effort and the willingness, the commitment, I don't see it in the political class at the moment at all. I think people will rally around that. I think people are in need of this kind of dream in order to find again their humanity, in order to feel alive again. Because, you know, we all feel like we go from one day to the next being beaten. So I think, yes, this is possible, but I don't see who could do it, you know? Maybe tomorrow we'll have a new figure, a new individual that will do it, but I don't find this kind of inspiration. We need somebody like Gandhi, you know what I mean, that kind of person. And then about Maonomics, I think that I think the way that the Chinese system has moved is very much in parallel to our system. I think, when I wrote that book, the situation was different because the effort of China was to modernize, and it was modernizing very, very quickly in a very short period of time. But the model was our model. So, I mean, it was capitalism, basically. And this has proven correct, because that's what they've done. I still think that there are certain kind of advantages that the system still has vis-a-vis our system. That doesn't mean that I am in favor of the way they're repressing the Uyghur or the way the system is evolving, which is decreasing freedom more and more. Their COVID policy is absurd because, I mean, they cannot defeat a virus. It's almost stupid, but in reality, you know why they're doing it, because it's a form of control. Because, I mean, of course, the system is now realizing that it needs to increase the control, otherwise it will not survive. It's not sufficient anymore to bring development, because, the country is developed. Now the problem is to prevent the very rich from taking over the control of the Communist Party. But having said that, there's still elements, for example, the way they're dealing with imposition of restriction on the billionaires, control of the banking system. All of that makes their future crisis more manageable than our future crisis. But I think in the long term, China will be as capitalist as we are, with less freedom, officially less freedom, because we're not free either, I mean, so, yes, I mean, we have the illusion to be free. The Chinese will be without that illusion. So it's very negative, Sorry.
Well, it's been a pleasure to hear you, so thank you for being here. You talk about people being kidnapped, smuggled, so on. I would like to know, who are they? Is it big corporations? Is it tribe chiefs? Is it corrupt civil servants? Who are they who are doing this? That's one question. And another one is about China again. What's the role of China in Africa now, both West, East? What I've heard is that they're buying raw materials and land. Obviously, they are all doing it silently. But what is the role and what is the plan, if you have been able to see that? Yeah. And third, what's the cocaine route now? So it's been very interesting to know about that. Thank you.
Did you ask me who are the kidnappers?
Yeah, is it corporations?
Yeah, okay.
I mean, or because if it's big corporations and we can spot them, it's easier to fight than if it's sort of threaded somehow. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, okay. But, yeah. Okay. So what happened now with the migrants is that and the same thing that happened before also. So you would start your journey let's say, you start your journey in Chad. Then you would do the journey piece by piece. So you would go from Chad, for example, to Mali, and one group would take you there. Then another group would take you to the next border, to the next border. And the same thing is in Europe. So these are very small groups of criminals. They control the territory. So that's the key issue, is that you need to control the territory. And because this is very difficult, the territory is generally small. And inside that territory, so in that part of the journey, you can be kidnapped by the same people that are carrying you, they're taking you, so the smugglers. So how do you get kidnapped? So you get kidnapped, they say, okay, I'm not going to take you anymore. You stay here. So this is why I was saying that with Al-Qaeda and the Maghreb, the infrastructure, because of course, you need to have places where you can keep these people so that these people will not escape. And then once you are in these camps, you will ask them to call their family, and the family has to pay extra money. So that's the form of kidnapping that's taking place today. And it can happen anywhere. It can happen also in Europe. I mean, it can happen in the Balkans, it can happen in Germany, anywhere. So you don't know how much this kind of journey is going to cost you. In any case, your family will pay the ransom. If you can't pay the ransom, then you get trafficked. You get trafficked, especially women. So you get to a certain place, you work as a prostitute, and then who knows what's going to happen to you. Then the debt keeps rising. So we're not talking about organized crime. Organized crime is not interested in this business because it's a sort of piecemeal kind of business. Organized crime is interested in the big kind of business. So that's why the cocaine. So you'll never find the organization like the 'Ndrangheta or the mafia involved in the migrant smuggling, even if, of course, they arrive in Sicily or they arrive in Calabria. It's not something that they're interested in. And that's why it's so difficult, because it's too decentralized. Now, does the local police know? I mean, do they know who these people are? I think in Europe they do. But again, often the policy is not to interfere, because as long as these people are kept under control by this organization, it's better. Otherwise, you have to deal with them. The cocaine route is the same; it hasn't changed at all. I mean, you still have a route that goes to the U.S., of course, but this is still the best route. Now, because of that, of course, the price of cocaine has collapsed in Europe since 2003, and also the use of cocaine has increased tremendously. I mean, in the old days, cocaine was the drug of the very wealthy, because it was very expensive, because of course, it came, on that triangulation. Now, you can buy cocaine in nightclubs, and everybody, weekends, go to London for the weekend, you go to a couple of disco, and you can get cocaine almost as much as you get drink, considering how expensive is alcohol in the UK, which has created a real big crisis of cocaine. Now, before the Taliban came back, also heroin was quite inexpensive. now because of what is happening with the Taliban, not because the Taliban are against heroin smuggling, but because of all the problems with the new borders, there has been a slowdown, but I'm pretty sure that we'll go back to whatever it was. The heroin business has changed a lot because since 2001, so after the fall of the Taliban regime, basically the producer, number one, opium has stopped being exported, but is being transformed into heroin inside Afghanistan. And then from Afghanistan, the most important markets have become Iran, Pakistan, so the local, the neighboring countries, because it was cheaper and you would make much more money. In the old days, they would bring all the opium to mostly Italy, and then in Italy it'd be converted into heroin. Now it doesn't happen anymore, so you get heroin coming straight from there. I can't remember the third question, China.
The role of the Chinese in Africa. Yeah.
Well, what the Chinese did in Africa is, the Chinese didn't want to interfere with the US or with Europe about resources coming from the Middle East, because that has always been the area controlled by these two, either by the European company or the American company. So they looked at Africa. We're talking about the late 1990s. They look at Africa as a sort of source of their resources because nobody was there and nobody was going to bother them, and they were not bothering anybody because the Chinese don't want any confrontation. So yes, they have done incredible things. They basically control most of Africa in terms of investment, resources. Also, Africa is a big outlet for them. And it's not necessarily bad. Somebody was telling me a few years ago that plastic flip-flops from China have put shoes on every single child in Africa. Well, before, they would not have any shoes. So it's not necessarily bad. But yes, it's quite scary because if they want, they could control the entire continent. And let's not forget that Africa is also the one that, demographically speaking, is growing fastest than any other continent. So sooner or later, there will be the day of reckoning. But for the time being, yes, I would say that it's a very, very important, maybe the most important area of the world for China.
Cuando los migrantes comienzan el viaje, el camino hacia ese sueño que persiguen, ¿saben lo que les espera?
Sí, lo saben porque yes, they know it because they know the stories. Yes, they do. Do they know the extent to I think they do, actually. But, if you have no choice, I don't know what's the percentage of success, but, it's very, very low. Maybe it's, 20%, 15%. But what's the alternative? If you have nothing, if there is no way. Yeah, of course, there are lots of people that do it without understanding, but I think, there are also lots of people that do it because Yeah, I mean, there is the good and bad everywhere, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that the migrants are all very good and we're all very bad. I think there's good and bad everywhere. But I do not believe that people embark on that kind of trip with such a high risk of dying or being tortured, being trafficked or anything like that. Because they want to, because they want to have, you know, the new pair of jeans or something like that. I think people do it out of desperation. I mean, often they also do it because if one of them reaches the destination with that money that that person earns, they can feed an entire family. So, you know, I think, you know, these stories are real, and they're extremely tragic. And they're not only the Africans. I mean, you know, I mean, I have a Filipino clean lady. You know, I mean, she's doing very well, but you know, she goes home to see her family every 2 years. I mean, a lot of it, I mean, there must be people here from Colombia, also from Honduras, from Venezuela, that have left their children home with their mother in order to come here and become clean lady. Now, I don't think anybody should live like that. I think it's, I mean, these people also have tragic lives. Not as tragic as the other, but still, I mean, you know, nobody should be forced to live like that, full stop. I don't think it's right.
Bien, creo que ya tenemos que ir terminando. I think we should finish. And, thank you very much for such an interesting and terrific analysis of our world, and thank you.